This is episode 283 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, we have another map out on the red, yellow, green status from the state of New Mexico. Oh, wait, turquoise, sorry.
Turquoise, teal, chartreuse, mauve. But no, just four so far. So,
yes, just four so far, as you rightly say. Well, good news overall. I think it's safe to say that the state still, by and large, moving in the right direction in terms of COVID-19. Not much in the way of changes outside of that. Of course, the big push is on to get school districts open. And I think it's safe to say that Santa Fe County, which includes, of course, Santa Fe City, moving into the green is a very big deal. Same with San Juan County, frankly, because and McKinley County as well, because those were two of the hardest places hit by COVID-19 way back when in the very beginning. And it's good to see San Juan and McKinley counties. Of course, that herd immunity will do it. And I've talked to my sources in the San Juan County community, and they say that the vaccine is quite plentiful up there. I think there's maybe an effort to specifically target those areas of the state for the vaccine. So between lots of people having it at the outset and maybe a little bit of thumb on the scale in favor of them getting the vaccine, they've headed into the green territory. We in Bernalillo County remain in yellow, as does Sandoval County. The only, poor Guadalupe County, the only red county in the state of New Mexico now is Guadalupe County. Otero County squeaked under the bar at 4.98% positivity. That's good enough to get the job done for them. But
yeah, and that positivity one of as things go down, that could be a problematic because, there's two ways that positivity number is influenced. One is that if not many people have it and not many people are getting tested, and then a couple people come in and get tested and have it, it could put you over that. I mean, hypothetically, if 10 people were to take it, you have no COVID to speak of, but 10 people take the test, one person has it, boom, you are over the threshold and you're back in the red. So I'm sure we'll see adjustments with that, whether they'll come before or after we have the unintended consequences, that remains to be seen.
Yeah, we're not making any vouch whatsoever for the science behind any of this.
No, we're just saying it's just the numbers.
But yeah, I think that it's safe to say that Santa Fe, especially city of Santa Fe, for a lot of folks, not just here in New Mexico, but across the country, it is a special area when it comes to tourism and the level of restaurants that they feature, and getting one of those major tourist destinations for our state into the green can do nothing but help with us moving back in a more normal direction.
Yeah, and then to talk a little bit about San Juan and San Juan County, they were hit, and McKinley. They're hit very hard, but when a lot of people have it, that's some herd immunity right there, and the fact that vaccinations are relatively plentiful in New Mexico, and we're not just getting them in the state borders, we're getting them in people's arms. That's all good news, as contrasted to Europe, which is having a lot of problems with its vaccinations, and they're seeing rates go back up again at the same time of the year, Northern Hemisphere, it's spring in Europe, maybe not just like New Mexico. We have our own special kind of wind and dust in the spring, but the fact that the country as a whole is doing well and New Mexico is doing well, that's all good news. And that's all groundwork that was laid by some people that didn't get much credit for laying the groundwork in terms of getting vaccines developed in the United States and getting them plentiful, So good things happen nationally, and they're flowing down to New Mexico. And like I say, the fact that when it gets in the state, we're getting people vaccinated, that's fantastic news. That's good to be that we're at the top of any measure that you would perceive to be a good measure. So
Yeah, our governor deserves credit for getting the vaccines out quickly. Of course, President Trump and the pharmaceutical industry deserve credit for getting the vaccines created and developed very quickly as well. So you can have bipartisan, cross-partisan credit. And by the way, speaking of that, New Mexico wind, we're just moving into the mask season in New Mexico when the only rational time for people to wear a mask around this state, typically because of the blowing sand and dirt that, quite frankly, really do have negative impacts on people's ability to breathe and the air quality. Speaking of which, masks, and we've talked a lot about them, but a year plus into this whole thing, I finally had to work out in a mask for the first time throughout the entire COVID situation. I'm not going to tell you, I cannot confirm nor deny where I have been able to work out, but I can say that I had to go to a local gym and do a workout here and wear a mask. And without going into too much detail, if you sweat, which you generally do when you're working out, masks really are awful. They are just, they're bad enough when you're sitting around or walking around at a reasonable pace. But when you start to sweat and that mask gets wet, it is not a very effective or comfortable thing to wear. And my point in bringing that up is that our student athletes are playing a variety of sports right now, including football. And I would be I'd be very frustrated if I was an athlete having to take the field or whatever other sport that people are doing in a mask. It's just not comfortable or effective, I don't think.
yeah, and then the thing I'm seeing more and more of, and again, this is not science and data. This is anecdote. Is I'm seeing a lot of people have masks on and they're wearing them right under their nose for that very reason. That exercise thing is really bad. Yeah, I'm with you. And if anyone's played football, it's cooled off a little bit. If anyone's ever played football when it's hot, period, having shoulder pads and all the padding and the helmet on, and then to put that mask on, that's just got to be a special kind of misery. So
exactly. Now, while we can applaud the governor for her efforts to get the vaccine out and into people's arms, we certainly wish and demand and expect that the governor will relinquish her powers in this so-called emergency sooner than later. And I will only add that there is a statewide rally going on, including here in Albuquerque on March the 20th. That's Saturday from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. There are folks that you can contact. 505-828-3430 is Karen Laurie. And I will be out at the rally visiting with folks. I think, there have been plenty of rallies, and these are around the state. Sarah Smith down in Las Cruces, concerned4nm@gmail.com. If you're interested in finding out more, we're going to be distributing this information as well to our email list. It really is enough is enough. It's time to allow people to get back to normal. Not that we didn't believe that before, but just the efficacy of the protest movement and efforts to do these kinds of things. I think the time is at that point where folks are ready to really get out of the governor's powers, get out from under her power structure.
yeah, and that's one of those. If not now, when? By all outward appearances, the SARS-CoV-2 virus that causes the COVID-19 syndrome will likely be with us in some variant. It's just put into the groups of viruses that will probably circulate amongst humans' population in the earth for a long, long time. It's very unlikely that it's going to be like something like polio or smallpox that is either eradicated or all but eradicated. And so, are we to the point where we don't need to do that anymore? Man, it seems like if we're not there, we ought to be getting really, really close.
Yeah, and it seems like the media are finally starting to ask some of these questions. An Associated Press article that also ran in the Albuquerque Journal over the weekend noted that despite differing approaches, a lot of states, many states, most notably California and Florida, though, have experienced almost identical outcomes in COVID-19 case rates. And I think while you can argue back and forth about whose population is more vulnerable or this or that, or did people wear masks, or were they really locked down, or were they not really locked down? The fact is that if you had policies that were proven to be successful, you would have at least a certain level of buy-in from people. But it was pretty early on in this whole situation that you started to see that a lot of the policies being pushed from, this is Trump administration, Dr. Fauci. This is current Dr. Fauci. This is state New Mexico, state of California, state of Florida, that the people who were really locking down the states and jurisdictions weren't getting some kind of magically better results. And this includes foreign countries as well, that they were not getting spectacular results that would differentiate them in any significant way on following the science from states that were much more open, not locked down, no mask mandate, those kinds of things.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And Paul, we've been talking about this literally for a year.
Yep.
And so I know it was raised on this podcast when that was basically, how dare you?
We were part of a death cult.
We were part of the death cult, and we were not saying that we shouldn't do anything, but we're just saying it's like actions have consequences, and those consequences are intended and unintended. And when it comes to policies like this, yeah, we've seen, asked another way, and this is not get to the root cause, but is there a correlation between, success in reducing cases and deaths in COVID and the economic impact? So, no, Florida, another way of looking at that same question, yeah, Florida's economy's done a lot better than California's economy with similar numbers. New Mexico's economy has done a lot worse than Arizona's and Texas's economy with kind of similar results. And so it's one of those things, you worry about not learning from history and then also over learning the lessons of history. Does that mean that a lockdown might never be appropriate or something that you might want to consider, a la 15 days to flatten the curve? But if something else is out there, and believe me, there are a lot of viruses, bird flu amongst, one of the ones that people have been worried about for decades now. This will not be the last outbreak of a virus that is new to the human population. And then how are we going to deal with it? The other thing that I've been thinking a lot is on the 1 year anniversary is just how they portrayed the novel coronavirus. Like it's different than any other virus. This virus it's so different. It may have 5, it may have 10% death rates. And there was a time where people really believed that. And boy, the modelers went to town. And believe me, you don't need to be good with an Excel spreadsheet to kill everybody on the planet with a 10% death rate on getting a virus, So it's one of those, from a modeling point of view, very, very scary. But again, as the data came back and showed that, yeah, this is much more like other viruses that we've been dealing with, the flu and others, very slow to respond from a public policy point of view when it came to policies like the lockdown. So
now, while the death rates and virus spread have been all over the place in terms of states that are locked down, not locked down, et cetera, you can pretty easily tell based on unemployment rates at the state level which states have enacted severe lockdowns and which states have remained pretty open. Good old South Dakota, numero uno in lowest unemployment, followed right there.
That's just because they have such beautiful weather there in the winter, Paul.
Absolutely.
It's just such a nice,
Yes, they have so many recreational opportunities
Yeah,
out
as
there.
long as you don't mind freezing to death. And no offense to our folks in South Dakota, but yeah, the fact is they have a lot going against them, and even with that, they did pretty well.
Utah right there tied with them, with South Dakota at 3.1. Nebraska, another state with some beautiful weather, at 3.2% unemployment. On the other hand, Hawaii might be most people's idea of nice weather year round. They have 10.2% unemployment rate. California 9, New York 8.8, New Mexico 8.7, and you can just follow that up. The bottom five. Now remember, they include not only states but jurisdictions. District of Columbia 8.4% unemployment rate. I think that might be the murderer's row of blue states and districts in the United States. Hawaii, California, New York, New Mexico, D.C., 5 highest unemployment rates in the entire country. So we are, unfortunately, in New Mexico, still suffering those effects. This is newly released January 2021 from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Not a surprise, but definitely troubling that New Mexico remains in such dire economic condition.
Yes, and some of the parts of New Mexico that have been hardest hit. You alluded to travel and tourism, restaurants. Those could conceivably come back relatively quick. I know there is, during the pandemic, things like boondock camping, where you go camp kind of out, not in a campground, but out there on BLM land or Forest Service land, as far away from people as you can get. I did a bit of that myself, and it was amazing. I had the same ideas about 3,000 or 4,000 people from Arizona and Colorado and California and Utah out there in the Badlands of Utah. But people are going to want to come to Santa Fe, and hopefully we'll have something for them to do and a policy that will allow them to come. So,
well, having restaurants now, that's obviously going to factor into March's unemployment data. So these things do lag a little bit, and certainly New Mexico's reopening will help. But of course, other states are also reopening as we speak as well. Now to some of the different tasks at hand, specifically the legislative session, which we are in the finishing week.
5 days to go.
Yes. What they call sine die will happen at noon on Saturday. That is the 20th. There's a lot that we're still looking at, and we are in the dreaded period of the legislative session where they not only have meetings on Saturday, they meet on Sunday, which is nobody's idea of a good time, I'm confident, legislator or member of the public alike. And there's still, as I said, a lot going on. The first bill I wanted to highlight, HB 291. Now, this is the preeminent opportunity, if you will, for a tax increase, a significant tax increase. Remember, specifically tax increase. There's plenty of bad regulations, poor economic, planning or whatever. But HB 291 would be a tax increase. It passed the House with, this is the one that had the top income tax rate going up, and then had the, if you don't live in your house, your property taxes could go up by up to 10% every single year.
And then capital gains tax
and
go up.
Capital gains taxes as well.
Yeah. So 2 out of those 3, Paul, are huge for startup businesses, economic development. And, and what's so sad about this bill is, well, why do we need to do this? Why do we need the money?
Exactly.
Because has oil and gas gone down permanently, like somebody said? When no, it's recovered. Right. Are we not going to get any money from Washington because Trump's there? No, there's huge money coming to New Mexico, and yet we're doing this. So, but Paul, tell me, they did address all of the inequities and problems with gross receipts tax in this bill, didn't they?
Not at all.
I have, of course, am being shocker there. But yeah, so the one tax that, believe me, I I'm realistic. I'm a realistic New Mexican. Let's just say I know that we can't get rid of the gross receipts tax, but we could make it a much less onerous tax that doesn't destroy creation of capital and growth of businesses and attraction of jobs and companies here. But I guess that'll have to wait for another day.
Yeah. So HB 291, as revised in the Senate, so it passed the House as previously described. Now it would include a cigarette tax hike from $2 to $3 a pack, which that won't be paid because everybody will find cigarettes on Indian reservations and tribal lands where they can avoid the New Mexico tax, and you'll see an increase in smuggling. Still, personal income tax up to 6.5% from 5.9. A small decrease in the GRT from 5.125 to 5, which doesn't get the job done in terms of reforming that tax.
Well, yeah, because they put these local options that's just been driving the gross receipts tax total. That's just the state portion that that 5.125.
Yeah, and hitting on the corporate income tax 5.9 to 7.6. And so, yeah, the question is, why are you even considering? And Senator Bill Tallman, a Democrat who actually voted for this, unfortunately, in committee, said during the hearing, why are we raising taxes when we already have so much money coming in? There are some low-income credits and exemptions and basically eliminations of the tax burden experienced by low-income people in this tax proposal. But if you want to do that. You have the money. You're not only going to have all of what we talked about before, but potentially you have marijuana money coming in, which is something we're going to talk about in just a few minutes. But we're going to move much more quickly at this point. So that is one of the bad bills. Mandatory paid sick leave, unfortunately, seems likely to pass. I know you and I, Wally, we've worked on this and talked about this extensively. The bill HB 20 is heading to the Senate floor. No exemptions for small businesses. It would apply to babysitters, leaf rakers hired for a single day's work, or mom and shop businesses with one part-time employee. You got a lot of issues with that. And then to top it off, they exempt government employees from the entire thing. This is just another burden on businesses. And
and that's a sign of a bad bill right there, Paul. We know, and they do the same thing in Washington. A bill is really bad if it applies to everybody except government employees.
Exactly. So HB 20 is one of the bad bills I think is going to make its way through. We'll see. SB 42. This is Mimi Stewart's bailout of the Education Retirement Board, which essentially a good pension reform means everybody gives up a little something and puts the system on a firm footing. This is the taxpayers dump a whole bunch of new money into the ERB, which is not particularly solvent, and nothing else changes. So it's a bad piece of legislation. The Albuquerque Journal recently editorialized on this. HB 4, I expect that Brian Egolf's going to get his big payday here with regard to the Civil Rights Act and suing local governments. So that is of concern. That is awaiting final passage in the Senate as well.
Yeah, and those local governments are scared to death. Small municipalities are just about what that might do to them.
Well, they're being told by their insurance providers that they probably won't be able to purchase insurance for their employees based on passage of that legislation. Yeah. So it's a real issue there. We do not have a budget yet, although the Senate has taken up and already made some changes to, and by Senate I mean a committee in the Senate, to the legislation that passed the House. So we're not getting the Senate just taking what the House did and doing it, passing it through. But the Senate so far has kept the 1.5% pay increases across the board, which we think is unfortunate and unnecessary. I would be shocked if they went to a special session here after all of that we've seen in a special session and session-wise. But you never know. Still no budget has been signed. SB 130, and a bit of good news from over the weekend. This is the potential, this is Bill Sewell's from Las Cruces, Senator Sewell's introduced SB 130, which would require that 75% of all fleet vehicles purchased by the state, presumably including police cars, be electric. And there's 51 charging stations across the state. So most government employees would spend all their time commuting to those charging stations. Thankfully, that one actually failed. I was there to testify. I was the only voice of opposition, and miracle of miracles, majority of the committee decided to not pass that bill forward. They tabled it. The really bad news, I think, is the dog that hasn't barked, which is the various bills to restrict the governor's power in this or future crises, emergencies. It doesn't
And this
look like,
and future governors as well. So
exactly,
yes.
yes. And that does not look like it's going to happen. HJR 6, the constitutional approach, which would avoid a governor's veto, has been stalled. And I kind of figured that when the governor came out and said what she said about stopping it, about avoiding it, or vetoing it, I should say, that she was putting out a signal to Democrats that they are not to move this through the process because, of course, both houses controlled by the Democrats, and they are, they're loath to directly cross this governor.
Well, and on things like that governors have a strong enough opinion. New Mexico has the line item veto. And as I recall, you can veto even capital expenditures, the hidden capital expenditures that they seem to not want people to know what they are. But yeah, the governor has a lot of tools at her disposal. And so we said, I mean, not cheering against that bill. I think it is a good bill and a good approach that didn't probably have a real high likelihood, because that would be a huge crack in the unified nature of the Democratic Party in New Mexico were that to come out. So
yeah. Now, while both of us probably thought that was a long shot, we understand that 90 days is not the cat's meow. That would have been
Right.
when the legislature got a seat at the table. And we hope that something will change here, but we suspect that those bills will not ultimately see passage. If you had come to me before the session, and we talked about this
Right.
before the session, said there are what are two ironclad locks? I'm giving you the old Sunday John Madden guarantee wins. Yep. Wally is not currently smoking. I believe there's FCC rules on that, but no, I'm just kidding. The pot legalization has
it looks iffy at best.
It's not the deadlock that I had originally expected it would be. It basically, in my opinion, if you asked for a clean bill and gave it a yes or no or up or down vote in both houses, a clean bill setting out a fairly regular licensing regime and a taxation regime for marijuana, it probably would pass in an up or down vote pretty overwhelmingly. This is a classic consequence of everybody. It's like the equivalent of earmarks or additional provisions in a basic, simple bill that have kind of overloaded it. They're trying to address social justice issues, criminalization issues, race equity issues, and all kinds of other things through these pieces of legislation. It's not enough just to say, we're going to legalize marijuana moving forward in the state of New Mexico. We'll see. There's still time for one of these bills to pass. I suspect it'll be just one if they get one across, but definitely surprised at how challenging this has proven.
Yeah, you're right on. Just the things they tried to load up in there. And then at least on this bill, this is one of the few that I actually feel like the issues have been debated in committee, and I didn't watch a ton of the marijuana, but I saw enough to know they're like, well, if we regulate it too extensively and tax it too high, we're just going to keep the black market going. Yes, but if we go the other way, there might be an overabundance and the marijuana growers will go out of business, or the medical marijuana folks will be damaged. Again, all these factors, I don't say they solved them, but at least they put them on the table. I think those would have been hard enough to solve, but all that, the laundry list of everything else, you might as well, if you want to kill it, let's put gross receipts tax reform in the in the marijuana bill if you want it to die for sure. And things are maybe not quite that controversial, but certainly controversial. And again, controversial and not a uniform position within the Democratic Party. And let's face it. So if the Democrats all see eye to eye on something in Santa Fe, it usually happens, given the overwhelming numbers in both houses. But there is definitely a difference of opinion on what ought to be in that or not medical. I keep saying medical, in that recreational.
It's all medical.
Yeah, it's all
marijuana.
medical. It's all medicine to me. So
Yep.
no, in the recreational or whatever you just.
And that is one of the
medical.
controversies that have arisen, is balancing the needs and desires of medical marijuana patients in New Mexico with those of recreational. And the governor certainly wanted this bill passed at the beginning of the session, so she's certainly involved here. It's interesting to watch, and just gonna sit back and see what happens. Now, the other one is HJR1. HJR1 means that we're talking constitutional amendment.
Right.
And 1 means that it is a high priority because they got the very first one. And it's not just HJR1 this year. You could look back.
Yeah, it's almost a lot of the years.
Yeah,
they camp out for those concert tickets early on.
You are right. Yeah, they put HJR1 very front and center in terms of the legislation that is put forth in each session. This is, of course, the early childhood, pre-K, Tap the Permanent Fund entire effort. No John Arthur Smith. We thought this would be a relatively straightforward path to passage. That has certainly not turned out to be the case. And I think it's an interesting conversation they're having. If you assume that the fundamental problem of New Mexico's education system is a lack of resources, then why are you dumping all of this money from the permanent fund into just pre-K? So the conversation, and we don't have even firm legislation on this, is over whether to spread that money out into the existing education system. Right. So, K-12, not just pre-K, and maybe even looking for more money out of the permanent fund. So very interesting stuff. Again, this is more of a get your popcorn and watch, because we at the Rio Grande Foundation have talked to Catherine Stevens at American Enterprise Institute and other experts about the real issues facing our education system. The lack of pre-K is nowhere near top of the charts, nor is, quite frankly, the lack of resources a primary reason for our school system's ineffectiveness. So, we can hope that this thing does not pass through. And if that were to happen, I think you and I might be the most shocked and happy people the day after the session.
Yeah, and this one is turning out to be a little bit like the marijuana bill. It's like, yeah, they worked on pre-K, session after session after session. And then, as you say, John Arthur Smith isn't there to hold it up in the Senate Finance Committee. And they try to expand it to the point that now there's a lot of disagreement. So I don't know. Unlike the recreational bill that I still think maybe has a chance. This one maybe has a chance, but it looks like both of those are maybe we're going to be talking about those in coming years. And it will be interesting whether either one of those would rise to the level politically that if they don't get done in this regular session, is that the sort of thing that they would try to get done in a special session sometime in 2021?
You got it. We've talked a little bit about the Rail Runner recently. Of course,
it's back open.
It is back open. So exciting. And I happen to virtually attend. That is one of the great things about Zoom. And we'll give a full post-mortem after the session about the pluses and minuses of the Zoom session. But one of the pluses is that it's a lot easier to get to some of these hearings and even be incognito when you are there. This was a committee hearing in House Transportation where they received a lot of information about the rail runner from people involved in it. And I did a quick screenshot. You put it up on the Zoom screen, and it's easy enough, especially with my beloved Mac, to do a screenshot quickly. You could not tell from looking at their own budget documents that the rail runner was out of service for just about an entire year. We are currently, by the way, in fiscal year 2021. Fiscal year will turn over at the end of June, and we'll get into 2022. The operation and maintenance costs of 2020 were $27,209,000. 2021, $28,672,000, and that rises, year in, year out as we see higher costs. But
it's not even. Yeah, it doesn't even appear like they were burning less diesel, which you would think would be a big component of cost of the rail runner, but maybe not. Maybe they use that for those operation and maintenance costs for everything that they had been delaying since that fine project has been underway here in New Mexico.
Yeah, and I don't know. This is the information that they presented to the legislature, so I have nothing better to provide. What I do think is interesting, and again, I think the federal government picked up the tab for at least a significant part of this, but you can go down, and this is all posted at errorsofenchantment.com. You can click on the document itself and really dive into it if you're into the financial kinds of things. You can go into the capital costs, though, and in 2020, FY 2020, positive train control, and I guess they lumped this in with Wi-Fi, whatever reason, but the positive train control is the federal regulation, very expensive. FY 2020, $38,616,000. That's 1 year, and then the next is $18,691,000 in 2021. So, it's all play money at this point anyway, because Washington's printing it, and we're just a pass-through for all the money that they're spending. Total capital costs in 2020, $72,700,000 because of the reduction in PTC, $56,392,000. These are costs that are baked in. Of course, if you pull the train up, positive train control goes away. The capital costs year after year are on the order of $43 to $45 million, and that's baked into the system. We are just, if we had halfway rational policymakers in this state and a legislature that could read these documents,
right,
they would have pulled the plug on the train so long ago, it would have made your head spin. But
now, Paul, can you tell easily, and I don't want to put you on the spot, I know it's a low number, what percentage of total expenses are funded by actually the people who pay the fares to ride the train? Was that readily apparent? Because that's been a shockingly low number over the years. So.
Well, I've never done that number because I've never had it for the combined capital and operating.
Right.
We've always done operating, and it was under 10% of the total operating costs that were funded by the people who ride the train.
And that's not taking into account, as you said, the 60, 80, $100 million of capital expenditures.
And that's even low for other transit systems, which mass transit does tend to be heavily subsidized. But if take the example of like the New York subway, about 50% of their operating costs traditionally,
right,
not this year probably, were funded by the people who rode the train. DC's Metro, 35 to 40, and it goes on down from there, because with these systems in place, it always benefits them to have people cheek to jowl, very close quarters. The Santa Fe, New Mexican story about the first couple of trains that ran said they had 17 whole people on each of them.
Wow.
Which not only is not fiscally responsible, It is terrible for the environment because you could easily stick those people on a relatively small commuter van and drive them around. You don't need a gigantic train burning fuel and all the costs associated with that. But who am I to criticize?
Yeah, 2 points. One, that you can run a lot more cars than the two or three that traditionally run on the rail runner. And then I haven't seen the calculation in a while, but the last time I was looking at capital and operating, it was something like everyone who is a regular commuter, you could buy them a Prius every other year, just give it to them to drive to Santa Fe and back and kind of be in the same, which just shows that, as a, if you have to have a train, so be it. But in terms of what it costs taxpayers, what it costs society compared to other things that are possible, it's I won't call it the worst deal in government programs because boy, that's a pretty low bar to fall over. But it's a bad one, at least here in New Mexico.
Yeah, and finally, this week's interview podcast deals with energy, and Bruce Bunker gives a full debunking of climate change, etc., global warming at least. But we took a look at a report, and there was some back and forth. Initially, in the early stage of the Texas power blackout, there was pretty strong indicators that the main issue was wind not being available. Then there was kind of the return of the Empire Strikes Back, and the wind power people and the so-called green people, led, of course, with ample resources by the media, were able to say, no, it wasn't just wind and solar and those kinds of power sources that really failed. But America's Power, this is a study that they published. The coal fleet responded when electricity was needed in MISO and SPP. Now, I'm not sure if you can explain this, but there are
different control areas that operate as a somewhat unified system. Now, they'll have connections in between them, but you can kind of say this is the area that if the power's, like if you're going to have a blackout and black it out, this is the one that's going to happen. Right. It wouldn't necessarily cascade across the whole United States is one way to look at it.
These are parts of the Texas grid, though.
Yeah.
SPP but what I'm, MISO. And so the data that we have is for those two. We don't have it for ERCOT. I don't know. I haven't seen that. But for these two, they're indicating that nuclear performed extraordinarily well throughout this situation, with essentially them being able to provide between 90 and 98% of expected power via nuclear. Coal set between 84 and 73. Natural gas suffered some outages, and I think this speaks to, as we move natural gas into home heat, we've already done home heating. That's been a long-term thing. Every house I've really lived in my life has been heated with natural gas, and you turn on the stove that's natural gas. Electricity generation additionally requires infrastructure that I think maybe that's going to be or should be a focus of where Texas invests in making sure this doesn't happen again. But in these two grid areas, wind was only 17 or 13% as effective as it needed to be, as it traditionally has been. So
yeah, because it was cold, it iced up, and in some cases the wind was blowing too hard, and you have to shut down those windmills. So I don't know, people who know about renewable power and its reliability, I don't think we're surprised by any of that. But yeah, it was interesting how that initially came out, that early data, and then there's tons and tons of pushback on that. But I don't think, based on I've numbers and I've seen similar reports to these, Paul, and I think that's all comes from the same people. Yeah, it doesn't look like wind is not the most reliable source.
Right.
What is? It's nuclear and coal. Natural gas is okay, but when it gets really, really cold, we've seen there are freeze-offs in the oil field, and there's problems with that. And the one thing that nuclear is, once it's running, and with coal, you don't need a pipeline to a distant gas field. It's very difficult you can store natural gas, not very well. Coal, there is the thing called the coal pile. It's one of those And I've asked coal mine or power plant operators, how long could you operate your plant without coal? And depending on the plant, it's, 3, 6, 9, 12, some as much as a year and a half, 2 years without mining any more coal. It's highly, highly reliable. And when we have these, it's like the Princess Bride. Inconceivable that we would have it be this cold. Well, yeah, it gets cold sometimes, even in Texas, and it will again. And we have big storms that come. And when that happens, your electric system is either up to the challenge from a reliability point or it isn't.
So very quickly, you talked about natural gas, and that's relatively clean compared to coal, about 50% of the CO2 emissions. Are there ways to make natural gas much more reliable as bearing such a heavy burden? Because I also, in this Errors of Enchantment post in which I cite this, I note that in electricity generation in Texas, natural gas really, I think it's much higher than coal and nuclear combined, and it dwarfs wind, which they've invested a lot of wind in Texas. They've got a lot of wind turbines down there, not as much in the solar area.
You know, anything can be made more robust, but the cost effectiveness of storing natural gas in large quantities has proven to be very elusive. And when they do, many of the storage facilities for natural gas have been done more as a price arbitrage, where they put it in old salt domes where they can put it in there when the price is cheap, in the summer where people aren't using a lot. They tend to not respond very well. You can have pressurized gas storage vessels, but really what they do is pressure up the pipe a little more. And could you build some, pressure vessels that had pressurized natural gas that you could pump into the system very quickly? With enough money, it would probably be more cost effective than the rail runner. But is that really going to be the best, going to be the best way? And so, like I say, Paul, I've worked on those projects, but typically they've never relied on natural gas being the source because they had coal and nuclear in such abundance. As those go away, it's going to change. Also, can you do things in the oil field to make the oil wells more reliable and the compressor stations in the Permian Basin and other places where they produce natural gas more reliable as part of it, and the pipelines to get it there? And the answer is, I'm sure there is, but what is the cost of that? And then who's going to bear that? And so this whole thing about how reliable is our power grid going to be as these changes go on? People are putting a lot of faith in batteries, which again, you get back to cost and the cost and economics, and then the engineering things as well. So I don't think there's right now, I see no needle in the haystack. I see no magic wand that you're going to wave over this. I think it's going to take, frankly, more things like have been happening in California and increasingly, in other parts to say, you know what, we need to take a different approach. And what is that going to be? Are we going to have some coal-fired plants? Are we going to make these very, very expensive investments in other technologies to make, say, natural gas more reliable? Or are we just going to say, better get used to it. This is the new normal. So,
and I got to throw a question out of the blue at you. It was reported this week that there's at least a chance to keep the Four Corners power plant, not San Juan generating station, but Four Corners, open on a seasonal basis, something I have never heard of for a coal-fired power plant. This is the one that PNM said they're going to get out of. They were going to or are considering selling
and
to.
The Public Regulation Commission wasn't real thrilled with their filing to do that initially.
Right.
But yeah,
well,
there's other owners of that plant.
The PRC
as well.
is largely captured by environmental groups. The current one, and I'm sure that when the governor gets her hands on them, it won't change much. But they're going to be real shy about handing that over to Intech, Navajo firm that's going to keep it open full time. Now, the environmentalists were, of course, lukewarm to the seasonal option because they really do have it out for coal. They want to get rid of coal 20 years ago if they could. But that's a interesting system, I guess, to try to keep the coal-fired power plant available so that they can ramp up electricity generation in the warmer summer months.
Yeah, and one of the things about coal plants is they run their best when you run them, basically 80% or close to all out, just very even. It's the base load power. And then if you're going to make renewables ever hit the grid, you have to have stuff that you can churn down quickly. Now, coal plants used to be horrible at that, but over the last many years, as more wind and solars come on, they've gotten better at ramping up and down. But this idea they're talking about is a seasonal where we'll run it. We'll run it in the summer where we really need the power. It's one of those you probably want to. I'm not. Yeah, I've done some maintenance analysis on coal-fired plants. It's better if you keep it running most of the time. But yeah, I think that this could be something that would work out. And I think people who are who've looked at the numbers are saying we might need stuff like this, or we're going to have brownouts. And believe me, it's hot in Albuquerque, Paul. But man, if I'm somebody who lives in the valley there around Phoenix, your air conditioning or your electricity going out for a week in the middle of the summer there, I don't think that's an inconvenience. I think I don't see how many people, only the most robust could even survive. So I think we might see more things like that. The other thing is that the San Juan power plant, they're looking at putting carbon capture on that. There's the project where a company's working with the city and others to try to put that. These are very positive, probably very beneficial and needed. But when it comes to what the enviros say, they don't really like anything that deals with coal. You're absolutely right about that.
And I'll just note before we go that Deb Haaland has officially been confirmed by the Senate. And that means that there will be a special election here in CD1, Congressional District 1. 40 senators voted against her confirmation, so definitely a critical mass of concern against Deb Haaland, but we knew kind of from the get-go that she was likely to wind up confirmed. And that's where we'll leave it this week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to this show at Apple, Stitcher, and have your Google Home play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.